This is fairly extensive, so bear with me. We're going to move into what I call Jeffersonian democracy. But what that really means is we're getting into the 19th century now, right? So Thomas Jefferson is elected in 1800. That is a very contentious election. That should go into your reading from Tuesday? I don't know what day of the week it is. The reading that you had called Inhaling Republicanism is in large part, and I know we didn't discuss it yesterday, but it is in large part about the election of 1800. Highly contested, highly disputed. I mean, it got nasty, it got ugly for politics of that day and age, right? In which they were not very polite to one another. The Federalists had been dominating control of the government at this point. That domination or that control ends, and it really ushers in a new period in American history, right, or specifically in political history. A couple of things that I want to point out to you. One, as acrimonious as the election was, right, which just means bitter, right? They were very, very nasty to one another. Adams and Jefferson actually maintain a friendship. The animosity that existed politically in that day and age is not the same animosity that exists politically today. I want you to understand that, so you recognize that while yes, there's sort of general name calling and negative statements made about the other, it is not the same as it is today. Okay, you'll learn this in more detail next year when you get into government, but like. We're in unprecedented times in American history right now, especially American political history. All right. To be honest, one of the predominant factors in Jefferson's victory is increased opportunities for suffrage. Right. So we're going to increase the number of people that are allowed to vote. And you have amongst the common folk, your yeoman farmers, your non-elites, they are opposed to federalism. And then there are specific behaviors within the Adams administration, like the Sedition Act, for instance. The Sedition Act outlaws speech, right, which is a direct violation of the First Amendment of the Constitution. Yet we do it anyways. The Alien Acts, there's a couple of different Alien Acts that you should have gone over last week when we did that PowerPoint over Washington and Adams. But a couple of those Alien Acts are aimed at trying to decrease the amount of people that can participate in American politics, specifically immigrants, because Adams believes that immigrants are not going to side with him. Therefore, he doesn't want immigrants sort of being able to participate. Right, so Jefferson is going to take over, and Jefferson is promoted as sort of the people's president, right? Jefferson is thought of more as a common man. I need you to understand, Jefferson is not a common man. We have never had a common president, not really. Okay, the very concept or idea of being able to obtain the presidency puts you apart from sort of the common average American. And even if somehow you managed to become president as a commoner, you would no longer be a commoner the moment you became president. Right? So Jefferson is going to take advantage of that, though, because it is it's a mentality that is going to aid him in his presidency. It's going to aid him in popular support. Right? People are going to like him because they're going to view him as being more like them. It's sort of similar to some of the ideologies or personas you see of Donald Trump today, right? I mean, I find it a little comical that you have a whole bunch of people that think Donald Trump is like a representative of them and a common person. That dude got a $1 million loan from daddy to start his business, right? And if that's common to you, like if you're going to get that, great, good for you. Does your father want another child? Because I'm willing to be adopted. No? Okay. Anyway. So Jefferson is also going to, and I will say this is one of the things Jefferson does that begins to set a precedent, right? And that's a term we'll use over and over again. Precedent is just tradition, how things happen, right? Jefferson takes over. We had a very bitter election between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. And Jefferson, in like his very first speech to the nation, basically says, look, man, we're all Republicans, we're all Federalists, we're all, like, Americans. Okay? And it's an appeal to a concept of unity. You hear presidents say it all the time. Biden took office and said, look, I'm not just a president for Democrats, I am a president for all Americans. Right? Whether you voted for him or not, theoretically, he's telling you, like, I will do what is in your best interest. We can argue about that more next year. All right. We saw significant increases in political participation, right? First, because a number of states are going to decrease or sometimes even eliminate property ownership as a requirement for voting. Right? And when I say decrease, what I mean is in some states prior to the 19th century, it wasn't good enough to own property. You had to own a specific amount of property, right? So if you own like 2 acres and you're just a little yeoman farmer, right, that's not good enough. If you own like a singular plot of land in the New England area as a merchant, right, not good enough. So we see significant increases in voter or in political participation because we see significant decreases in the requirements in order to participate, in order to be able to vote, right? That being said, I told you a second ago, Jefferson sort of has this ideology, this mentality of being an everyman. He is not. The Republicans do not really like commoners either. Right? In fact, Jefferson even goes so far as to make the comment that he wants an aristocracy of talent in the United States. Do we know what an aristocracy is? It's just another way of saying elite. Right? So if you see aristocracy, that just means like the elite people. The people that are better than you and me. Alright? In England, those people are born into that position. You are the Earl of Sandwich, or the Duke of York, or the Baron, or the Count, or I don't know, whatever those stupid like nobility titles are that exist all throughout Europe, right? We don't do that in America. It's actually outlawed in the Constitution. Okay? But what Jefferson wants is he wants what he calls an aristocracy of talent. So if you are smart, if you are clever, if you are quote-unquote better than everybody else, then you should rise to the top and become that American aristocracy, right? And then it is the American aristocracy that is ultimately ruling. Okay? And again, we'll go into it in more detail next year, but the United States is not a democracy. It was never a democracy. It was never intended to be a democracy. The founders do not like democracy, because they don't trust people. They think that the average people are flawed, right? Or ill-informed. And I want you to understand, it's not even necessarily this terrible, nefarious concept like, oh, American people are too stupid to learn. Some of them just thought it was impractical, right? Not that they were too stupid, but that they were too ill-informed, right? Because you don't have technological advancements of that day and age that can disseminate information over large distances expediently. All right? Jefferson, for all that he is, Jefferson is a wildly complex person, right? told you once before, Jefferson actually wrote a land ordinance in the 1780s that outlawed slavery everywhere other than where it did not currently exist. Right? There's a number of historians now that believed that Thomas Jefferson actually had a negative view of slavery. Right? He wrote in the Declaration, all men are created equal, and yet he owned slaves. Right? What's the question?
Didn't Abraham Lincoln get rid of slaves? Or
We'll get to that at the end of the semester. It's one of those things that has been taught to you as an oversimplification in history. The reality is Abraham Lincoln doesn't end slavery. Slavery is ended with the 15th Amendment, and Abraham Lincoln does not live to see that. 13th Amendment, sorry, 13th Amendment. Regardless, Lincoln does not live to see that. Okay? But we'll talk about that when we get to the Civil War, because it's actually, Lincoln is one of those presidents that now exists more in myth than in fact. Okay? Jefferson is also, he is a what we would call today a debt hawk, right? Any idea what you think that means? Or a deficit hawk? Do we know what a hawk is? What is that? It's a bird of prey, right? Okay. So throughout the course of this class and next semester, you'll have hawks and doves. Hawks want war, doves want peace. Yes, dove is the bird of peace, right? Hawk is a predatory bird, right? So if I tell you somebody is a deficit hawk, what do they want? No, they want to go to war with debt. They want to end debt. They want to go to war with debt because they don't want the United States to be $33 trillion in debt like we are today. Okay? And I need you to understand, there are a whole bunch of people that exist that think debt does not matter for countries at all. Alexander Hamilton goes so far as to say that debt is good for the nation. Okay? With sort of the idea or the understanding that if you were in debt, what do you have to do? You have to work hard and make more money and grow economically in order to pay your debt off. So Hamilton actually has this odd belief that if you have debt, that forces you to grow more, thus debt is good for growth. Okay? Thomas Jefferson does not believe that. Okay? In fact, Thomas Jefferson is going to do a handful of things in order to try to eliminate the debt of the United States. And yet that dude couldn't balance his own budget. Right? And I've told you this over and over, right? What happened to our Southerners? Our Southern elites, many of them, not just Jefferson, right? Washington, Monroe, a whole bunch of our founding fathers, specifically our Southern founding fathers, essentially die penniless. And they die penniless because they're just not good at budgeting for themselves. They spend exorbitant amounts of money hoping that the next year's crop can pay it off. They've got to keep up sort of a persona. Their house has to look nice all the time and be well furnished, and because people come over. They're trying to project a lifestyle that they really can't maintain financially. And so again, Jefferson is odd in that regard, right? The way he behaves publicly and the way he behaves privately are very different. Okay? Jefferson even goes on to have a number of children with one of his slaves, and that is a depiction of her. There are obviously no pictures of Sally Hemings, but that is a picture of her based upon descriptions that we have in writing of that time, right? when Jefferson takes office, Jefferson is actually going to differentiate from Washington in the sense that he's not going to have people in his cabinet that are of the opposing party. He's going to try to consolidate power amongst the Democratic Republicans, right? And he's going to try to remove Federalists from power. And one of the ways that this ends up happening is we realized very early on with the election of 1796, right? In 1796, John Adams became president, yes? Right? Who became his vice president? Thomas Jefferson, right? Why? Because we didn't really understand. I mean, we didn't. Like, we created this whole system and still didn't really grasp how it was going to work. Jefferson received the second most votes, therefore he became the VP, even though he and Adams were of opposing parties. They were of opposing ideologies, right? During Jefferson's presidency, they're actually going to have Aaron Burr, like, right alongside of him, and so everybody that votes for Jefferson also votes for Aaron Burr. That gets wildly complex because then what happened? If everybody that voted for Jefferson also voted for Burr, because they get to vote twice, who won the election?
Both.
It was a tie. Right? Now, interestingly enough, the Constitution actually has a provision for what happens in the event of a tie, or in the event that somebody does not receive a majority of the vote. It goes to the House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives decides on the next president of the United States. They pick Thomas Jefferson. Okay? But it's going to lead us into modifying the Constitution relatively early on. Okay? When Jefferson takes over, one of the first things that happens under the Jefferson administration is John Adams, right before he's getting out, we actually call these the midnight judges. John Adams is going to appoint a whole bunch of people to judgeships throughout the U.S. government, right? Now, it's important for you to note a couple of things about this. Number one, right, judges serve for life. Life. Okay? You cannot be voted out. You can be removed. Like, if you are corrupt, they can kick you out of office. If you've taken bribes on the bench as a judge, you will go to prison and you will be removed from your position. You can be impeached the same way a president can. But otherwise, so long as you have good behavior, right, you stay for life. So if John Adams he's already lost the election, right? And he knows that the Federalists are going to lose power. What John Adams does, intelligently, is he's going to go and appoint as many Federalists as he can to judgeships throughout the country, right? That's going to take that Federalist ideology, that Federalist mentality, that Federalist political ideology, and keep it in control of at least one of the three branches of our government. Thomas Jefferson is unhappy at this. And so Jefferson and Madison, who is his Secretary of State, decide that they're not going to deliver these commissions. Basically, John Adams signs a whole bunch of commissions at midnight before he leaves office. That's why we literally call them the midnight justices, or the midnight judges. Okay? And then Adams leaves town. Right? He goes home to Boston. And so these papers signed by the President of the United States are just sitting there, right, waiting to be delivered to the people who get these jobs. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison go, we're just not going to send them out. We're not going to mail them. Problem solved, right? Sound like a good plan to you? No? I mean, I'll be honest with you, sounds like a good plan to me.
Yes.
Well, no, I mean, if you wanted these people to not get their job, that actually sounds like a decent plan to me. What other recourse do you really have if you're Thomas Jefferson? Like, what other option do you have? That's what they're going to do. They're going to not send these out. All right? One guy, William Marbury, is going to sue. wants his job. Right? So he never gets his commission, he never gets his appointment letter, right? But he knows that it was signed, right? He knows that Adams appointed him to this position. He is going to sue. So he's going to take this to the United States Supreme Court. The Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court at this time is a man named John Marshall. Okay? Marshall is ultimately sort of the father of the Supreme Court. This is the dude who's like the head honcho of the Supreme Court. Just to put this into perspective for you, see this document right here? This is every Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in American history. That is all 17. That's it.
Oh my God.
That's it. 17 of them in 240, however many years. I don't do math. Right? Just so you understand, that's John Marshall. He's the fourth. Okay? These three guys do not last very long. John Marshall gets his job in February of 1801, right? After the election of 1800 has already happened, he's going to be appointed the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He gets his position because Adams is still in office at that point. It's going to go to the Supreme Court, and John Marshall, obviously appointed by Adams, is a Federalist. Yes? Makes sense? So, who is John Marshall going to side with?
Marbury.
You would think. You would think. But here's the problem. Right? If John Marshall sides with Marbury, how does he enforce his decision? Like if you go back to 5th grade, right? You learned in 5th grade, we have 3 branches of government. Each branch does a different thing, yes?
Yes.
Right? Congress, what's the verb? They make law, right? The president enforces law, and the Supreme Court interprets law, right? So, Marshall has interpreted the law. Who's enforcing it? Do we really think that Jefferson is going to enforce what Marshall said when Marshall sides against him? Probably not. John Marshall is smart enough to understand this. And so John Marshall basically declares a small portion of the Judiciary Act of 1789 to be unconstitutional. That means, did Marbury have to get his letter? John Marshall says no, he's still entitled to the job without getting his letter. Getting the letter is just a formality. It was already signed, therefore he deserves the job. But the Judiciary Act of 1789 was written incorrectly. It's not constitutional, therefore Marbury does not get this job. And this case becomes one of the very few ridiculously important cases in American history because it establishes the precedent of what we call judicial review. This allows the 9 justices sitting on the Supreme Court to review laws, not every law, but laws, right? There has to be a challenge that comes to the Supreme Court. Okay? But they get to review the law and determine whether or not the law is justified. Right? Whether it's a legal law. Because you understand, Congress could pass a law right now that says only men can hold office. Yes? They could probably pass that because there's more dudes in Congress than there are women. Would the Supreme Court allow that law to go into effect? No. Right? That would be a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. You cannot treat women differently than you treat men. Right? But that's what judicial review does. Alright? That's already this slide. Alright? Jefferson's economic policies. Again, Jefferson and Hamilton don't like each other. Right? In fact, there's a lot of animosity between Jefferson and Hamilton, not just politically. They don't like each other politically. They don't like each other personally. Alexander Hamilton actually blames Jefferson for his inability to become president of the United States, right? Because Alexander Hamilton got caught cheating on his wife, right? He blames Thomas Jefferson for leaking that information, although most historians believe today, or at least most historians that I've talked to about this, I'm with them. I don't think Jefferson's the one that leaked it. Right? Jefferson stood to gain from it, but I don't think Jefferson's the one who actually leaked it. Okay? But Alexander Hamilton is the sort of economic father of the United States. He is the creator of our economic system. He creates a national bank as the Secretary of the Treasury. He was the first Secretary of the Treasury under George Washington. Right? The Constitution allows for Congress to coin money, borrow money, spend money, tax, do all sorts of things. Hamilton is going to create the National Bank of the United States, right, in order to oversee all of this. And that bank then is going to operate with debt, meaning that bank can take out loans. And Hamilton sees that as a good thing, as a positive, right? That is a net positive. Hamilton wants that to happen, like we talked about a minute ago, in order to stimulate economic growth. Okay? Thomas Jefferson disagrees. He thinks that debt is a burden to the people and to the nation. Okay? And therefore, he is going to cut spending. He's going to try to hold revenue in the bank in order to pay off that debt. Okay? Initially, Jefferson wants to kill the bank altogether. Okay? He does not like the Bank of the United States. But over time, during his presidency, he comes to recognize that the Bank of the United States is actually probably beneficial for economic growth. Right? And so he's going to backtrack on that, and he's going to allow the bank to remain. Okay? As much as this guy wants to end the debt, right, he's going to spend $15 million that he don't even have the authority to spend. Okay? So, during Jefferson's presidency, he sends a guy named James Monroe to France. Monroe is going to France in order to try to negotiate an agreement with the French to open up the Mississippi River to American shipping. Okay? We know where the Mississippi River is? Right? We'll use my bigger map here. Right? Like this is the Mississippi River. Yes? Okay? It actually starts way up here in Minnesota and goes all the way down through New Orleans and then out into the Gulf of Mexico. Who controls New Orleans? The French. Right? The river itself is the boundary between the French Louisiana Territory here and America here. Okay? That means theoretically both countries can use this river, except who controls the mouth of the river?
France.
Definitively France. So France is cutting off American shipping out of the Mississippi because they control the port through which the Mississippi exits. Monroe goes to France in order to try to negotiate some sort of agreement to allow Americans access to the ports at New Orleans. Okay? While there, right, France has undergone a revolution, right? They now have a French Republic. Napoleon Bonaparte takes over. Napoleon Bonaparte is pretty much, he is a dictator. He's an authoritarian, right? He wants to essentially conquer much of Europe. As a result of that, he is far less concerned with the Americas. He sees the French Empire as being a European empire rather than a global empire, right? And so what that leads to, right, what that leads to is Napoleon's willingness to sell Louisiana. Monroe was not there to buy it, okay? But Monroe basically realizes, this gets us the port, this gets us everything that we wanted. I might not have a better opportunity, right? He cables Thomas Jefferson, right? So they send a letter to Jefferson, right? Asking, like, what do you want me to do? Jefferson's like, we're going to do it. We're going to go ahead and do it. Okay? So they're going to purchase New Orleans from the French for $15 million. You buying it in gold in this day and age. You're definitely buying it in gold. Okay? So here's what I want you to understand, right? The purchase has to be approved by Congress, right? In fact, this is another one of those contradictions that we were talking about with Thomas Jefferson, yes? Thomas Jefferson is an ardent, he's a very strict constitutionalist. He believes in the Constitution. He wants limited government. He does not want increases in governmental power. Therefore, he technically shouldn't have bought the Louisiana Purchase. He violates the Constitution. He doesn't have the authority to do it. Only Congress has the authority to spend money. Okay? Now, Jefferson does it with sort of an emergency declaration because in order to get Congress to come to Washington, D.C. and meet and vote on that, it would have taken months. Jefferson doesn't think he has months to wait, right? Because, again, France is in the middle of a war, right? But they've already had the Haitian Revolution, right, where, like, the slaves of Haiti rose up and kicked all the French out, right? Napoleon is overextending himself in Europe and fighting all kinds of people. And theoretically, Napoleon could die in battle at sort of any moment, in which case the offer might not be on the table anymore, right? This is a large part of the reason why Jefferson is going to go ahead and do it. And it ultimately becomes a pivotal moment in American history, right? All of that in yellow right there is the Louisiana Purchase. It doubles the size of the United States. Doubles overnight. The U.S. is now twice as large as it once was.
So what happens to the people, like, if the people that are in Louisiana, whenever it gets purchased, like, and given to the United States, do they just become, like, Americans?
No, they wouldn't necessarily give up their citizenship, but they would have an opportunity to. Right? I mean, I believe you'll see this happen in your lifetime. Right? Where the United States will cease to exist, and then the question is, like, if you live in Texas, do you want to be a Texan? Or do you want to, like, be an American and go move somewhere else? You would probably be given time to make that decision. It would not happen overnight. Like, if Texas were to secede from the Union right now, you don't all of a sudden lose your American citizenship. That we'll get to that. That's way more complex because Mexico got its independence and then started inviting Americans in and then wanted to kick them back out. And yeah, that got really complex. And then Texas became a country, and then Texas joined America because they were afraid that Mexico was going to attack again. We'll get all that. Wildly complex. Okay. So doubles the size, right? It creates some issues in the sense that there's now way more to deal with. There's more Indian nations that are now falling under American sort of purview or American authority because it's American territory, right? It removes sort of a buffer that we had, right? Because obviously, if you're looking up here, right? All of this is Spanish territory. Spain is fairly prominent. We had the Louisiana territory here as a buffer, and then the United States. That buffer is now gone, and we're butted up against the Spanish, who are fairly territorial and want to acquire more stuff, right? The Federalists do fear that this is going to cause problems for them because it increases land size, which is going to increase like the number of sort of middle-class people, yeoman farmers, people that are not elites, that are typically siding more with the Democratic Republican Party, right? After the purchase, Jefferson is going to put together an expeditionary team, right? So Lewis and Clark are going to be put in charge of exploring this new territory, right? So they're going to set off from St. Louis, okay? They're going to go up the Mississippi River, and then they're going to go west, okay? It is meant to be a scientific expedition, right? Meaning that they are out there trying to learn about the territory, map the territory, right? In fact, they even go so far as to find like all sorts of new animal species, plant species. One of them, and I can't remember which, one of them is a military officer, the other one is an actual scientist, right? And I don't remember which is which off the top of my head. But it is an intellectual endeavor. I want you to be clear in that, right? They are not going out there, even though they're both technically like trained military officers. They're not going out there to like conquer and kill people, right? It's a smaller group. They are moving through the area, just trying to essentially view, map out, and catalog whatever it is that the United States just purchased. Okay? They will make it all the way to the Pacific coast, which is important to understand because out here you have the Oregon country, which is controlled maybe by Spain, maybe by Britain, maybe by Russia, maybe by the United States. God only knows. They're going to go this far, but one of the great things that they can do is because they're the ones that sort of make it through here first, right? They can claim that territory or that area for the United States through like the rights of exploration and like actual arrival, right? Like white folk kind of have this weird rule: if you're the first one there, I mean amongst white people, right? And you like plant a flag, it's yours and you own it. Right? Understand that, right? I mean, this has become important. Sacagawea is a Shoshone woman. She'd actually had a fair amount of interaction with whites through French traders, right? Because the French are still engaged, especially in like the northern area of this, right? Like west of the Great Lakes, there's still a lot of fur trapping and trading that's going on. She actually joins them and acts as a guide, translator, negotiator, and helps them immensely. She's far more familiar with the area, with the territory, and she is capable of acting as an intermediary, a go-between between the tribes that they meet and obviously this small band of whites that's traveling through the area. For the most part, most of the Native American tribes that they meet are very friendly, right? They actually help teach Lewis and Clark's expedition about all sorts of things. Sacagawea helps teach them, right, about like herbs that are used medicinally or things like that that are unknown to white people at this point because they've not seen these plant species and things like that, right? The Federalists are actively seeking to try to regain power. Ultimately, the Jeffersonian era is successful enough and popular enough, the Federalists die out. They'll never hold like major power again. But a couple of things that I want you to understand. There's still a number of prominent Federalists, none probably more important than Alexander Hamilton, who are still advocating for sort of an elite aristocratic rule of the United States. Okay? And they're actively trying to ensure that that happens. Eventually, Hamilton is going to find himself in a duel with Aaron Burr. And there's some historical disagreement as to what happened. Do y'all know how dueling worked? I always find this comical. Like, you basically like go back to back with somebody, you walk 10 paces, you turn, and you shoot at them, right? But then there's like ridiculous unwritten rules about like how you should fire and where you should fire, and like because I want you to understand, like, let's just say that Maddie and I were in a duel, right? Okay? Do I want to stand here like this, right, or would I rather stand like this? I would probably rather stand this way, right? Makes me a smaller target.
Yeah.
But depending upon like the unwritten agreement that you had, like that would be dishonorable, right? There's this weird concept of like honor and duty that go into dueling. There's a number of duels that happen throughout American history. I mean, Andrew Jackson, for instance, is a part of like 8 or 9 duels. Not all of them that he's fighting, right? He's a second, what's called a second in a number of duels, right? But a lot of the times, like, you know, if Maddie and I somehow like if she disrespected my mother and now I must fight her or whatever, right? Like she refuses to apologize because she thinks my mother's terrible. I don't know. Like we would go and duel, but are we really gonna kill each other over that? No. No. Most of the time, no. Right? We're simply gonna be like, I have honor. I defended my mother's honor. I challenged you to a duel. Like now I'm gonna shoot at the ground or I'm gonna shoot into the air, and we're done. And that's the end of it. Right? Sometimes that doesn't happen. Okay? There is some disagreement as to whether or not Hamilton and Burr were actually aiming or intending to actually kill one another. Right? Ultimately, Aaron Burr is going to be charged with murder over this. It ends his political career. Honestly, the dude probably should have just been executed sometime later, right? We have the election of 1804. Thomas Jefferson is going to be reelected with relative ease, right? Not just relative ease, with absolute ease. Again, wildly popular. Things are going great. He's accomplished so much. The country is growing economically. The debt is going down. Everything is wonderful. So it shouldn't be hard for him to get reelected. Right? That brings us back to Burr, though, who now, because of the duel and his like pending murder charges, his future in America is basically shot. And so the theory here is that he gets together with a military general, who's Wilkinson, and he wants to go west of New Orleans. He wants to use New Orleans as the capital, right? And basically start a new nation, essentially in what is like Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma today, right? But by definition, that is called treason. And if you commit treason, you should be executed. Okay? The story goes, Wilkinson alerts Jefferson. They actually put Aaron Burr on trial, but the evidence is not great. Okay? Despite the fact that there's like, there's actually, there's what's the word I'm looking for? Testimony, right, that Burr is actually in contact with the British, right, trying to get munitions from the British, right, in order to allow him to come and conquer this area, and then he's going to essentially align himself with the British and give the British a foothold back into the Americas, okay, which the British still desperately want, all right? There's still a significant amount of turmoil between the United States and England at this time. Okay? Jefferson is significant. Again, this goes to some of the contradictory aspects of who Thomas Jefferson was as a person. Okay? When we wrote the Constitution, we talked about the Constitution in depth. We know that there was the 3/5 compromise. We know that we had to figure out something about slavery. It was that like elephant in the room. Nobody wanted to deal with it, but you got to. Right? One of the sort of provisions in the Constitution, we kicked the can down the road. We said, look, we're going to allow the importation of slaves for 20 years, and after 20 years, then we'll reevaluate. Right? And the minute that they can reevaluate, they end the transatlantic slave trade. Okay? So that means in early 1800, right, the early 19th century, I think it's 1806, 1807, we are going to end the importation of slaves. Now, the illegal trafficking of slaves is still going to occur for a number of years. There are people that make a lot of money, right, on on human trafficking. Actually, you can still make a lot of money on that today, right? It's black market. Don't do it. It is illegal, right? But people are a very expensive commodity. Okay. So there are people that are going to violate this law. There are smugglers, American smugglers, that are going to continue to import slaves for a number of years until the United States Navy really cracks down on it and we don't allow anymore. And that being said, we're still going to go another 50 plus years with slavery in the United States. Okay? And because we have sort of maternal chattel slavery, meaning that if you were born to a slave, you are a slave for life, that's going to actually not only perpetuate slavery in the United States, it's actually going to lead to increases in slavery, right? And we'll get to that when we talk about what's happening in the 19th century, all right? But we're going to outlaw the slave trade. Again, Jefferson is a slave owner, but he's going to do this, okay? Some of the foreign policy issues that Jefferson deals with, we have the Barbary pirates. Piracy is a legitimate problem in the 18th and 19th century. I mean, shoot, y'all know the pirates still exist today, right? Right? So depending on where you are, like you need to be concerned with piracy. There's not a lot of laws in like open waters, right? In fact, maritime laws are really interesting anyways. Did you know that if a ship is ever, this is not important for today's lesson, but just fun facts. Did you know that if a ship is ever run aground and abandoned, you can just go claim it and it's yours? Yeah, so here's the deal. If you are ever captain of a ship and you run it aground, you better not just abandon ship. Okay? Because if you do, somebody can just come and take it, and it's now theirs legally. If you find one that's been abandoned, right? Okay. So the Barbary pirates are actually in the Mediterranean Sea, okay? And they're predominantly African, right? So you've got like North Africans that are patrolling the Mediterranean Sea. They're boarding U.S. vessels. They're demanding bribes, right? The United States can't stand for this, right? U.S. shipping vessels need to be protected throughout the globe. This is one of the reasons why the United States has an incredibly strong Navy. This is one of the reasons why naval power has been of the utmost importance throughout world history. And ultimately, like the Marines are going to go and they're going to go like invade Tripoli. It's actually part of like the Marine Corps hymn now, right? They talk about from the shores of Tripoli, and they're going to end that piracy. All right. With the war in Europe, Europe is also at war. Napoleon has created a massive cluster, right? That's problematic because as Europe is tumultuous, right, and the French and the British are at war, they've got to figure out how to like resupply themselves and things like that. You've got a whole bunch of British people that were were leaving the British Navy. Okay? That leads to impressment, which is basically the British stealing American sailors and forcing them into the British Navy, which then leads to the Embargo Act, where Jefferson is trying to like prevent ships from going anywhere so that doesn't happen. Bye, have a good day. Yes, there's a quiz tonight.